Greetings. Welcome to the third class in this fourth semester of the Emerald Choral Academy. I'm Scott Kovacs. I'm the Executive Director of the Emerald Ensemble and Choral Academy, a professional choir based in Seattle. The Emerald Choral Academy is a series of interactive webinars during which our area's leading professional choristers reveal their personal tricks of the trade to community singers. These webinars are then made available freely to singers across the world via YouTube. This presentation is funded in part by a grant from the Washington State Arts Commission, in addition to the National Endowment for the Arts, For Culture, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, and many, many generous donors. We encourage anyone participating or viewing this webinar to make a donation as you are able at emeraldensemble.org. You can also find you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our mailing list to hear about future sessions of the Academy and other activities of the Emerald Ensemble. This webinar is being recorded. By participating, you are granting the Emerald Ensemble permission to share your contribution. Your microphones and cameras will remain off for the duration of the presentation. You can ask questions to the presenter by typing into the chat or Q&A features at the bottom of your screen. Periodically, I'll interject to field your questions. Today's presenter is our very own Dr. Gary Cannon, Artistic Director of the Emerald Ensemble, as well as the Artistic Director of the Vashon Island Chorale and the Cascadian Chorale. Gary is also known for his contributions to many local arts organizations through his pre-concert lectures and detailed and often very entertaining program notes. He's also one of my very dearest friends, and it is a great privilege to introduce him as he presents following different conductors. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Scott. I should also introduce Anya, my cat, who is on my lap right now. We will see how, given the way she is lying down, if she hits the space bar on my PowerPoint presentation and advances me forward or something like that. So yes, thank you, Scott. This is a topic which we first pitched a long time ago when we were starting the Emerald Choral Academy, of following different conductors. I am predominantly a conductor myself, but I'm also a singer. And I have found that the best way I have learned conducting is by observing other conductors as a singer. Work with dozens and dozens of conductors, some of whom I found easier than others to work with, of course. So here, though, my goal is to talk about some of them and the interests. This will be lighthearted. I'll include some stories, but most will be anonymous. Don't worry about that. Now I need to share the screen, don't I? Let's see. But the cat, her head is on my wrist. Okay, there we go. I am free. Let's see. Sharing the screen. And getting the right screen to share and clicking the right buttons. That should do it there. So yes, there we are. There I am, and I'm happy to answer questions. As you see my email, and you'll see it again there. Happy to answer questions if you have thoughts of specific conductorly questions. I'm here for you. And oh, good, there goes the cat. Perfect timing. I have to there. Just as in any musical discipline, with different performers, they have different styles and ways of accomplishing what it is that they're trying to do artistically. It's important to note, I think, right up front, that not every conductor is right for every singer. I tell this to all the singers who are auditioning for choirs that I conduct as well. And to be aware that that's okay. It's all right if this particular conductor doesn't work for you. I will start right away with a story that I adore. Many years ago, a singer had learned that I was quite the aficionado of the British composer William Walton. And so she came up to me, introduced herself, and said, "I sang with Walton once." She was English, and she said, "I sang with Walton. Hopeless. Britain too." That was what she had to say as her review of Walton and Benjamin Britten as conductors. Well, Walton was known as the great conductor of his own works, and Britten one of the great conductors of the mid-20th century. Their styles, brilliant though they were in results, were not right for this particular singer, this one singer, and that's okay. They were still great conductors. She was still a very good singer. and it all works out well. There are reasons why we did not title this presentation about following difficult conductors, because it is my opinion that the conductors not being difficult intentionally, they just have their own different style. Note that the conductor is there for the same reason you are. We're all trying to make as beautiful music as we can. The singer has certain variables that they have in play, the position of their body, their own musicality, their jaw, the inside of their mouth for vowels and such. The conductor has similarly dozens of variables at any given moment, especially if there are multiple sections in the choir. They're paying attention to everybody's jaw and body position and vowels, not to mention if there are instruments involved. I say this as a plea to start out right away, to have mercy on your conductor. They will make mistakes. Conductors are imperfect beings, no matter what they will tell you. So there we have it. Be aware that as I go about today, these are my personal suggestions. There is no textbook about how to follow different conductors, not that I've ever heard of. There are no articles about this. These are my personal opinions and suggestions. They do not necessarily reflect the official views of the Emerald Ensemble, but these are my own tricks of the trade, as we like to say in these introductions. As I see it, when you're working with different conductors, there are three different types of challenges, or different factors or variables, or groupings of factors or variables that come into play. And we'll talk about each of these three in turn. The first, and perhaps the most obvious, is gestural, what they do with their hands and their body as they're conducting. The second are verbal issues. They may use terms that you're not comfortable with or familiar with, or that need further identification. And the third category is environmental considerations, which may have to do with the room around them, or even the clothing they're wearing, and things that can present certain challenges. My goal then is today to show both in a general and specific sense how you can overcome each of these categories of challenges. I therefore encourage those who are here live to already start preparing questions about conductors you've worked with. You may have worked with somebody who had particular idiosyncrasies, and start typing it in now. That's okay, or at any time through the time frame. I would ask, though, that we keep questions anonymous, especially if the conductor in question is still working and is alive and among us. The purpose here is not to complain about conductors, but to solve certain problems that we as singers find ourselves confronted with. And to solve those problems, I want to start with a few general habits of singers. None of this will be new on this idea, but there's specific things which help me, at least as a singer, to deal with conductors with different styles. The first is, when I am having difficulty working with a particular conductor, to be extra attentive. There's a tendency when the conductor is presenting challenges for you that you just want to shut off and kind of close off. I'm just going to follow my score. I'm just going to do my thing. But I find just in a sense, the opposite is the case. The more I attend to what the conductor is doing, and the more aware I stay of what I'm hearing around me, the better off I am to try to understand and improve my own performance as a singer. Related to this in a way is to be extra prepared. The more independent that we singers are with our parts, and not just with our parts, but with our technique as well, then it'll be easier to follow different conductors. In a way, this whole following conductors is a whole exercise in self-sufficiency, knowing what you need to do as an artist so that you can work well in communication in different ways with your conductor. So there are four specifics I'd like to bring up. The first is to mark your scores, write in your scores, do it a lot. If the conductor says something, write it down. Don't depend upon your memory, and certainly don't depend upon the conductor arm waving that every single time, every take, every concert, every rehearsal. write it down in a way that's meaningful to you. Earlier in the Emerald Choral Academy, I did a session on score markings and have some ideas of my own that might help you in that work. So I'd recommend that you consult that presentation if it sounds of interest to you. The second thing, which is something that probably every conductor has told you to do, is to count. And in the context of following different conductors, I say this especially if the beat isn't clear to your interpretation, to your particular vision. You will have to be, again, more independent, and counting is the way to do that when we're talking about time. Some conductors are very thorough about cueing breaths and helping you to breathe and holding their body in a way that encourages you subconsciously to breathe in a particular way. However, not all do that. That's okay. There are different styles, again, for different artists. But you do have to breathe, especially if your conductor doesn't show it. Depend upon your own knowledge of your own technique. And there have been a lot of Emerald Choral Academy sessions about breathing and about knowing how to develop your technique. So that those can help also. And finally, the key is to watch. Even if you're a little confused, and I'll give a couple of examples of that later, of how to go about watching in a way that might make it easier for you to figure out what it is, what the different cues that the conductor is doing. In any circumstance, I always recommend to actively look up at least once per measure. And by actively look up, I mean you're holding your score and your eyes go wham and look back down. It's not just you're depending upon your periphery or depending upon catching the big gestures, but that you actively move your eyeballs so the aim is not to your score, but up to your conductor. Now, there's some of different eyeglasses or some that make that more difficult, but there are ways around that as well. Of course, if the tempo is very, very fast, you might only be able to look up once every 2 measures or so. And if the measure is very, very long or a slow tempo, it's good to look up more often than that. But I find this philosophy of at least once per measure has served me very well as a singer. So these are general things. Most everything I'm about to say will fit into one of these 6 categories that you see here. To be attentive and prepared, and the practical notions of marking your scores, counting actively, vigorously, breathing, depending upon your knowledge of your own technique, and watching your conductor very carefully and frequently. So I talked about those 3 categories, gesture and verbal and environmental. Let's go into gestural issues first. When most singers talk about difficulties they've had with following a particular conductor, it tends to fit in the category of gesture. Again, I invite those of you who are here in person to be typing in your questions, which Scott will field in just a couple moments. So, first, there are left-handed conductors in the world, and that's okay. When I was in graduate school, I did a research project that involved different conductors and observing them, including some left-handers who conducted left-handed, left-handers who conducted right-handed, right-handers who conducted right-handed, right-handers who occasionally would shift to a left-handed quasi-pattern, often for emotive purposes. I certainly fall into that category. Some people believe that, some conducting teachers believe that even left-handed individuals should conduct with the pattern in the right hand. I happen to believe that that's nonsense, but that's my opinion. But if you are not used to watching a left-handed conductor and you're in that circumstance, be aware that everything, just think of it as a mirror. I guarantee you've seen conductors who have mirrored their patterns. Oh, and I should stop sharing the screen so you can see my picture, huh? Then I'll have to share it again every time. Well, we'll do it anyway. I think you can see me now. Is that correct? I'm going to proceed with that assumption.
Yes, you can see
you've all seen conductors who mirror their pattern. I do it. Sometimes it's very effective. Sometimes you want to do it. Sometimes it's unconscious. And so all you have to do is remember that it's inward in a 4 pattern that I'm doing right now. In, out, and up, down, in, out. So it's as if all you had was the other side of the mirror. What used to be outward will still be outward. That's the notion in play here. The next one also, I'll give an example without moving back to the PowerPoint right away, but you'll see the text there in a moment. And this is when the choir is sometimes just after the beat, but they're still together. You might sing da 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 da, or something like that. I don't know how that translated on Zoom, if it did very well, where my beat was a little ahead of what I was singing. So long as the choir is together, it's not necessarily a problem. It may be for some conductors, and for some singers may struggle with that. But again, we're talking about how we as singers can adapt to learn how to work with these different conductors better. It's particularly common, as you may know, in orchestral conducting, to see that, where the orchestra will move ever so slightly after the conductor's beat. Part of that has to do with their working at different distances, and part of it is simply a tradition that's developed over many decades. There are times when I actually like it when a choir does that, and there are times when I don't, and I'll say actually follow the beat very carefully. One conductor friend of mine, when he conducted the Seattle Symphony, one of the first things he said to them was, "I want you with my beat exactly." And that was okay. That was his style, and he requested that of his performers, and that's appropriate. One of the performers came up to him during the break and said, "Thank you for saying that." That particular performer preferred that style. My main point, though, being in this case that I'm moving something around here, that it's still not necessarily an issue. Stay with the choir. That's the main point. Don't feel like you need to be right with the beat to try to teach the rest of the choir how they're supposed to do it right. Just sing with the choir, be as artistic as you can under that circumstance, and all will be well. I'm going to, this whole thing, since it's all in gesture, really, let's see. No, I'm going to share the screen for a little bit again. And I'm going to do it this way. Sorry, Zoom's share screen thing and the balance of what to see me doing is different. So there, as we have it, when the choir is after the beat, you can still be together. You're actually going to do a little conducting now, and we're going to talk about some of the different patterns that are involved.
So pardon the interruption. All we can see is a giant box that says slideshow, resume slideshow.
Ooh, how's that?
Much better, thank you.
Oh, right, thank you. I think that was my PowerPoint window doing something interesting. Okay, thank you very much for that, Scott.
I'm sorry to report that now whatever you just did, there we go. Now we can see the slide.
Okay, what did that do?
Now it says the hook inward motion count.
Okay, good. Right. That's progress. Good. A three pattern. Three pattern. So it's important to be aware when you're conducting, and I think all singers should have had the experience of conducting, and knowing that it's going to be difficult to jump back and forth. I am perhaps on the share screen. I think it will be easiest just to leave it unshared for a moment, and then I'll talk and show you the stuff as a summary later. Okay. So a three pattern is probably, perhaps I think it's the easiest one to do. There are three beats in your bar. As you may know, the downbeat will always be down. The beat 2 will always be out, or well, we'll talk about that. The upbeat always moves up. The idea behind that being that you have approached the up from outside, and it's just because it's easier to see movement outside than inside. Again, we'll talk about certain variables in a moment. So go ahead and follow with me if you'd like. This may be new to some, it may be old to others. You have a down, out, up, down, out, up. Doesn't that feel good? The shoulder may even naturally kind of follow in that direction. And there you have it. Every once in a while, you'll encounter conductors that have slight variants of this. For example, one that I have called the hook is 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3, and 1 and 2 and 3, where they make this little circle around. That stems from trying to bring, in my opinion, trying to bring together two different things that are very common. One is for the second beat to go out and stop and then come back in. And the other is to go one and make a nice hook around and then up. So when conductors sometimes subconsciously try to do the best of both worlds, they start with the circle, then they retreat and create this kind of hook. One of the reasons this is perhaps challenging to follow is that it implies that beat 2 will be very active. And when you're in a legato pattern, you're 1, 2, and 3, and you see these extra things only on beat 2, it can be distracting. So ways to approach that then are always to think the line through. And part of that is counting on your own, so you're not doing that extra subdivision. And part of it is just the independence, your own independence of time. Another thing that sometimes you'll see in 3 patterns, this is something that I used to struggle with, I will happily confess, is every once in a while there will be a kind of inward motion for 3 instead of out. Instead of 1, 2, 3, you might see 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or something else that comes inward slightly. I find that tends to happen, especially at fast tempos. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so it can be a little confusing if you're seeing that motion, given that we are, as singers and performers in general, so trained subconsciously to think that before the upbeat comes from the outside. Again, here the trick is just to count on your own. It might be some additional flurry of motion on that second beat that comes into play. You just got to keep your count. Know that sometimes the conductor might be intentionally doing something that wants to come up from this maybe visceral sense and beat to 1, 2, 3 that really shows this internal essence to it, whether that be emotive or for technique. So sometimes it's intentional, and you can interpret that based on how the conductor uses that particular motion. Good. Next, we'll talk about the 4 pattern. 4. So I mentioned that we always go outside and then up. Always, usually, that's the way that we're taught, at least as conductors. The beat 2 just goes inward. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. Again, this may be new to some of you, but it may be some of you are very familiar with this. I mean by that the physical sensation of doing it on your own. Some predicaments one may find in beat 4 is a conductor may go too far inward, something like that, and maybe not far enough outward to your personal taste. Sometimes that's on purpose. If there's a big event happening on beat 2, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and for example, or sometimes you won't go far enough out or far enough in. This is something that I used to struggle with. I remember one of the first pieces of advice I got from a conducting teacher was that my beat 2 tended to just move ever so slightly inward, but then my 3 was good at moving outward. I think it's just a feature of my own biology that I wasn't used to this kind of a crossing. I'm still really not, but I've learned how to do it as a conductor. So if you see someone who's not going in very far, you've got to be aware that it will take extra brain power to ensure that you have a steady motion through beat 2, whether the music is legato or truncated or something like that. Then you will create that illusion of motion. There are more complex patterns even than those. The most commonly encountered is the 6, which is usually divided into 2 3s that are done this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Kind of using a very simplified pattern here for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, this may be a new gesture, especially for those of you who have a little conducting training. You might never have actually gone that all the way to a 6 pattern. One of the issues you may encounter when you're following a conductor is this. You may see a whole bunch of swoops. Sometimes they function as circles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and sometimes they'll just be kind of a generalized swoop. Yeah, that can be difficult. It can be difficult to follow. Just yesterday, a singer friend of mine was telling me about a time when they were singing under a new conductor, new to them, and they leaned over to and they had watched very carefully to try to figure out where exactly the beat is in a pattern, I imagine not unsimilar to this. So they leaned over to the person next to them and said, how do you know where the beat is? And the person saying, this person said, I've been singing here 8 years, and I don't know. Now, I love that story, partly because it's funny, and partly because there's something special about a singer who has been working with a conductor that they found this particular difficulty for 8 years. There are many choirs in the world, and in this area, certainly here in Seattle, that singer could very easily have shifted somewhere else and found a different conductor they thought was more intuitive or that fit with their view of what they would like from a conductor. In matters of precision of beat, but they didn't. They somehow had found ways to make a pattern that they found challenging to follow, make it work for them. Part of that, I would say, is you've got to count. You get what little indications you can and count very actively, constantly. You may have to mark in your score more often, some of the counts, but that's fine. Again, you're marking it in your scores in order to help you follow the conductor. The other, where was I? Right, that's good. And the last pattern that I'll talk to you about is the hardest one to conduct, which may seem counterintuitive because it has the smallest, well, not the smallest number, but that is the beat of 2. You have a down, you have an up, that's it. Down, up, down, up. The reason it is the hardest to conduct well or conduct effectively is that the natural tendency is to bounce too high on the 1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And there comes a point, as perhaps now that I'm talking and not speaking 1, 2, 1, 2, you have no idea which beat is which right now, do you? Unless you were counting very carefully. I still know where they are because I'm the conductor. That's my job. 1, 2, 1, 2. I guarantee you that in my brain, I was thinking that one the whole time through. So that may be difficult. And really the only thing you can do there is count. You've got to count from the very beginning. You'll see perhaps a breath mark and then you move right in at the beginning. That 1 is maybe your most important point or the only point of reference that you get before you see very similar gestures. Ideally, a conductor will keep downward or move outward for the 1, kind of a 1, 2, 1, 2, where you can see very clearly what's up and what's down. Or they may just do a smaller bounce at 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. It depends upon the character of the music. And it depends on the biology of the conductor, what their musculature may naturally lean toward. I'm going to shift back to the share screen. Let's see if I can do that more readily. I think that works because I'm not seeing the box that I think you all saw earlier. So here's the summary of those kind of the gestures. In in the 3 gesture, especially looking for that hook and perhaps another inward motion. It's a matter of counting and a matter of thinking the phrasing independently on your own. In the 4 pattern, it may go too far out, too far in. Those are the most common things that I've observed, at least. Again, you get to count. For the swoops and the circles, which really can happen in any pattern, but it's especially common in those complex patterns like 5, 6, 7, and so forth. You again get to count. You've got to find your point of reference and keep counting. And if the downbeat is too high or bounces too high on the beat 2, you get to count. So you may see that the word count is there 4 times. We as singers have a responsibility to count even when the conductor is conveying the count in a way that's less intuitive to us individually. You may notice how many caveats I'm putting in this language, because I mean it genuinely, not just out of linguistic sophistry. There we go. Actually, if I want to talk about just a few other variables of conducting gesture, if I can, before questions, though, some because we may address some of them. I'm about 5'8". I have in the past followed conductors in positions who are rather taller than I am, and the question that I most often got for at least the first 2 years is to please conduct larger. It just so happens, though, that again, we're limited to our own biology. My wingspan is different than others. There are conductors who are smaller than me, have smaller arms than me as well, who do wonderful work. The key point, though, that I bring up as regarding size is that larger is not necessarily clearer, and it's not even necessarily easier to see. For example, and I'm going to stop my share and even stand up for a time. That should have done that. Okay. Does that work? You can see me? Yes, there we go. So if I'm conducting, this is my roughly middle range, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, I might conduct here. To conduct larger does not necessarily give it. Notice how there are a lot more swoops when I conduct larger naturally, and that your eye may have to track further away, so your eye is being more distracted than from the score ahead. Oh, I'm looking, as I look at myself, I can even see that my beat 2 doesn't go in as far as my beat 3 goes out. I apparently still need to work on that. Now, when conducting smaller, can have certain advantages. Now, you may think it's just harder to see or harder to follow, but again, it can have advantages, artistic advantages that are good. That we as singers can clue into. So, for example, you might get a very piano passage. I'll try to get a little lower so in this light you can see it against my darker background. Or it can be very crisp. Here, even when that little rhythmic pattern that I just made up, once I made it larger, it became bum 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 rather than bum 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 bum. It requires different kinds of techniques. You can even do this loudly. Bum 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 bum. One of my favorite moments of my self-conducting, or my favorite memories, was in Carmina Burana. At the end, the last movement, the bum 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 bum, and I just kept it very small. Bum bum bum. Bum, bum, bum. And it had great vigor from the singers, even though it was very loud music, and they sang it very loud, and it was magnificent, but it was all right in here because they were watching very carefully. They knew exactly where they were, and it added this sense of vigor or intensity or drama to what they were doing. So when the conductor is smaller, or when the hands are smaller, you are likely to watch more. And it also becomes easier to watch because you're focused on a smaller space. I feel at this point like I'm becoming a conducting teacher rather than a singer teacher. But the purpose of this again is, as singers, we can be aware of that what this takes to follow more effectively. Sometimes too, the conductor may take a not quite subliminal approach and conduct very small right in front of their eyeballs. That tends to be if the choir isn't following them or if it's not quite together. as if to say, look at my eyes, look at my eyes. But they don't want to do this, right? That's not very artistic. So they can do things like this, and you can do it at different dynamics or different softnesses or different articulations, even right at the eyes. So that might be something that we're conveying in that regard. Okay, good. I'm going to share the screen again. That should do it. Conducting size, there we go. Next, there's a theory in conducting that the ictus, which is the point there, where the beat happens, there's a theory that the ictus should always happen on one plane. I'm right now trying to aim it to the very bottom of my Zoom screen, though you can't see that right now, can you? Or at least it's smaller. That's all right. That is a conducting style that I find is very common, especially among people who started out as pianists and then became conductors. There's another notion that is very common, particularly among violinists who became conductors, and their ictus tends to be rather high. It might even be around the level of their mouth. They tend to keep their shoulders higher and their elbows. And that's just because that's how they're used to, ever since they were children, they held their instrument higher like that. So their biology developed to conceive of music in that way. Pianist conceives of music as one plane, just as the violinist conceives of it a little higher. Singers, we tend to, conductors, I was more a singer than anything else before I became a conductor, tend to conduct rather lower in our bodies, like around our stomach level, because that's where we breathe, where we're taught to breathe as singers. So there's a certain innate or innate connection of breathing and music and lowness in our body. So we conduct there. Sometimes, again, I've recommended by singers, can you conduct higher? I can't see you. Well, the problem there is not that I'm conducting too low, but it's that we can't see. So and I'll talk a little about that later, raising the conductor or even raising the singers to make that work, because there conveys this musicality of that particular conductor. When the conductor does conduct highish, or in whatever manner, or whatever plane the ictus is on, you may have to find yourself giving more attention to breathing. Not necessarily to the timing of the breath, that might be given you very clearly, but to how low you breathe, that you breathe with the fullness of your mechanism, which you can learn a lot about in other Emerald Choral Academy presentations. Especially if the conductor conducts high, like those violinist conductors I've mentioned, though certainly not all of them do that. There can be a tendency among singers to tense up their shoulders and to only breathe from their lungs and not use the diaphragm and their lower musculature to aid in the breathing. So you'll just have to do that consciously. You may have to write more often in your score, breathe, or breathe deep, or breathe well, or something along those lines. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my favorite conductors, actually, that I've worked with, who were very, very active. And I'm going to show you a couple of things here before I demonstrate. Sometimes you see conductors who move a lot, and it looks like it's unnecessary, but they're probably conveying something. And you may find similarly a conductor who, because they're being so active, you may find it difficult to find where the beat is exactly. It's different than the swooping mechanism or swooping conducting style that I talked about, perhaps. So now I'm going to turn off the screen share. There we go. This is another full body demonstration. So when I speak of very active gestures, an example might be something like this. And believe it or not, everything as I was doing right there, I was thinking something musical. One of the great conductors of the early and mid 20th century, Wilhelm Furtwängler, was known. Watch videos of him, and his left arm often kind of flings around, but somehow it conveys something musical in its own way. You can find videos of him. It's fantastic music. Worked in Berlin quite a while. So he's conveying something. It might be energy. It might just be violins keep up with me, since they're probably sitting right there. There are other things. One conductor I've worked with many times, remember with a large work for a chorus and orchestra, he has a tendency to kind of show a lot of subdivisions, and actively, especially in the right hand. And what I found with that particular piece is that he was showing a certain momentum. Even when the music itself was legato, he might do that same gesture or something close to it, sometimes, not always. And in doing so, sorry, I'm looking at the window periodically, wondering if my neighbors are watching here, if they're outside. Not watching this. Okay, so you see this kind of motion, and it may be more information than you think you need, but it's also conveying something. So one of the tricks is to figure out what that is, find out what the circumstance is. An example I was going to bring up later, but it's very appropriate at this moment, so I'll jump my own outline a bit, is one conductor I used to work with a lot, who had a tendency to do a gesture like this. So I'm holding my hand as a straight palm, and he would hold right in front of him. And it's tended to be in very dramatic moments. And it was for a while, I was figuring, what is he trying to go for? What are they doing? And then I realized, from observing the many different times when he would do that it meant to crescendo. Nothing more complex than that. Because every time he did that, there was a crescendo in the score, or he was showing some kind of phrasing growth, or there might be a larger scale crescendo over many measures. So it's a matter of finding the links when you see what you think is an unnecessary gesture. I want to bring up the subject now of where's the beat? Although that 1980s reference is very dated, so never mind. Once in a while, the difficulty of the beat will be caused by a kind of swooping gesture. We talked about that. There may be also changes of the ictus plane that we talked about. For example, if I have a sudden soft on beat 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, I might suddenly make it smaller and raise my ictus plane. Or if I'm a pianist conductor, I might do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and therefore my beat 3 didn't go as far out. And again, as the singer, that just means I need to be extra attentive in this case for that moment. That's also a time when I might write in my score, circle the sudden piano, sudden soft moment. Where's the beat? So there are a couple of instances. One conductor is very prominent, and I absolutely love working with. Is one of the most artistic conductors I've ever worked with. Who, among some singers, has a reputation for being kind of challenging to follow. There's one piece this conductor directed that was incredibly effective, artistic, but I struggled to find where's the beat exactly. And he tended to conduct a bit like this, and I'm not exaggerating. It would be this kind of a wide motion. I'm demonstrating only the right hand so that you can find it a little easier to follow. And you can kind of see the shape of a 4 pattern in there, but where exactly the beat is or where the downbeat is particularly difficult. The key was, so I just watched and was listening extra carefully. Sometimes you have to look at your colleagues physically, like move your eyeballs to them. And I finally figured out the downbeat was here. It was right behind his butt. It's fantastic. And the moment that I saw that, suddenly everything opened up of what he was doing otherwise, where the beat patterns were going and what it all meant and how visceral he wanted that downbeat to be. That it was not just a physical affectation, but that it was also an artistic expression. And so it helped me as a singer to find out what all the rest was going on as well. Again, sometimes it's a matter of giving your conductor the benefit of the doubt, and then they'll and a little extra time to understand what they're doing. Before I go back to the screen share and to your questions, there's only one other thing I'd like to bring up, and that is our good friend the stick. These events are largely geared toward singers rather than instrumentalists, so we don't always as singers use this very frequently, but it does come up, of course. The key with the stick, and we call it more often than the stick than the baton. Yes, that's the French term, and there's no wrong answer to it. I call it the stick just because, it helps to demystify this little object. The key with the stick usually is to watch the tip. I'm going to try to conduct this against the dark background of my sweater largely, and to keep my ictus plane. So you notice how the tip of it is right, more or less steady. Now, I talked about swoopy gestures. It's a little harder to follow the tip, isn't it? When partly that white background I have in the higher part of my office here. Here's a hook coming up. Where on earth was beat 3? I don't even know where that was, and I was the one conducting it. The trick then, because this moves around so much, even if there is a dark background, is to watch the bass of it, which may or may not be doing the same thing as the hand, because some conductors will play around with it. I like to do that myself. But notice even when I'm swooping around, you can see that my bass is doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Zoom tends to, exaggerate quick changes, but when you're watching conductors, especially at a distance, that can be a saving grace. Be aware that some conductors will shift the way they hold it. Some always hold it exactly like their teacher said. Some I tend to shift it around a bit. To me, this conveys legato very nicely. I actually find connecting with the stick to be very artistic for me, and very freeing. So you may find different things that you're watching at different times. Sometimes the conductor will actually do something like this. There's one of the greats in particular who will hide it during legato phrases and might go back to doing the hands, and then suddenly it'll be back. And it helps to be aware as a singer when those things happen, not to ask about them, but just to note it, and it may convey something that you can write down in your score as well. I've rambled enough about conducting gesture. Scott, do we have any questions on the notion of gesture?
We have not received any specifically about gesture at this point.
All right.
We do have one general question, which we might save for the end.
Ooh, exciting.
I'm certain that you will have much to say about that one. You have not discussed, speaking of complex gestures, you haven't talked about chant. Receiving gesture for chant and how we might be better communicators when we're in that mode.
Conducting chant is a fascinating enterprise. I'm not sure that I know any two conductors who conduct chant regularly who do it the same way. I am of the opinion in my work with chant, which is not as extensive as many, but I've done a fair amount and studied with one of the local chant leaders, that basically all chant can be divided into 2s and 3s. I say all chant. There are those very rare exceptions. And so I tend to conduct it as a 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2, something like that, as a mixed meter, with the notion of the meter may change. There are those who also who prefer to take a bum 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 will show a little bit of everything. The challenge there is that you'll see it'll tend to be on the smaller side, and you need to they'll be on the smaller side and maybe also less precise because chant is so naturally flowy. The chant is one of the. I actually knew one conductor who insisted on conducting chant even with the stick, which I never understood. But this was a relatively it was fascinating. I think that this conductor was mostly just saying, do everything with the stick, no matter what, to protect your shoulder. I think they went too far with chant. But I bring that up as an example. There are many different philosophies, and you may just have to sit and stare at your person. You may have to take some time off of singing to say, okay, what exactly are they doing in order to convey the implied meter of the chant? That's a terrible answer to the question.
Well, no, it's a legitimate one, especially since there's so many different styles of chant. Obviously, when you would conduct Gregorian chant differently than Anglican chant than you would, so it's a kind of a trick question. I'm sorry.
No, it's a great question because because it's I sing chant more often than I conduct it, and it takes extra effort, and there's no easy way to think about it. Really, the key with chant, though, is it's not about what you see, it's about what you hear from the voices around you, to be thinking as one.
Yeah.
And there's no easy way around that. But when you can do that, it's just brilliant, it's beautiful.
Yeah, as somebody who sings a lot of chant.
Yes, you do, right.
I can really, I can verify that thought. The measure changes, time changes, measure to measure. The question about observing and communicating time changes, meter changes effectively.
Yeah, that one you'd better hope that your conductor knows how to do it. But yes, there can be challenges in here, and there are two different kinds of challenges. One is if the denominator of the beat, as it were, if it's always in quarters and stays the change. If we always stay in quarters through the change, say a 3 to a 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, you may just have to circle the 2, or if you may find this conductor has the hook on 3, but they don't do that hook on 4, and they don't do the hook on beat 3 when they're in 4, and it can be distracting. When you have points where the lower number of the time signature may change, I'm seeing now in the chat the 3/4 to 5/8. Yeah, that's always fun. Let's assume that the quarter note stays the same. You have a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Well, let's assume that the 5/8 is a 2 plus 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And I'm using my inflection of voice purposefully, because you may find that as an easier way to follow, or a helpful way to follow the conductors. Generally, the 3 part tends to get a little more of a bounce. Not always, but it tends to be the case. And that may help you to link it. If you find a conductor who does a 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, where it's all slower, or smaller or lower, it may be a different kind of challenge. That assumes that they're doing their counting correctly. I have had, remember one conductor who, whenever they did mixed meters, the 3 part tended to get cut a little short. And that might mean you have to think more independently and not watch where their downbeat is, because it's a little earlier than where they really want it, perhaps. Yeah.
Good question. Good question,
Yeah.
Kathleen. Yeah, absolutely. All right. The question that Stephanie has posted here, I think, is really good for the end.
Okay. Yeah. For the next 2 categories of verbal and environmental are a little are more straightforward, partly because I don't have to go back and forth between share screen and looking at me, though I do need to go back to the thing once more and click on that, which is hiding behind there. That should do it. Good. There's my brief summary of the gesture. And we'll post all these available also. Good. Verbal communication. There are, if I remember correctly, I have 4 things on this slide. One is you may encounter conductors who use somewhat imprecise terms. The word blend is very common. That generally refers to tuning or vowel or some combination. We have a whole session here about what is blend, that we're with a panel that we talked for close to an hour, I think, about what blend means. It may mean different things for different conductors. So, and you can figure out in the context. For example, they may say, I'm trying to think of a good context that would make it clear. So often it comes without it. Blend better, make sure your ah is nice and tall. They're probably talking about matching your vowels. So it's just a matter of listening to across to the vowels. You can write that in your score. Ah, taller. It might be, blend better. That fifth was complete, or that octave wasn't right with the basses. That's a tuning indication. And chances are when they use the word blend, they will tend to mean it in a more consistent manner. The word more is one of my favorites. I once did a recording session with choir, and I had an incidental, a short little tenor solo at the end of it. And it was a recording session. The composer was there, and the composer at the end of the take, this particular take, said, "I need more more of the fifth from the tenor," who was me. And I thought, okay, what on earth does that mean? More of the fifth. And I thought, well, maybe it means my tuning was off and I was a little too low. So we sang it again, and I made my fifth, the second pitch of those two, on the higher side. And she said, "I still need more of the fifth." I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. Maybe she just means, the last pitch needs to be louder. Okay, we'll try that. And I'll also keep trying to tune it. Because I had been phrasing it in this delicate matter of yadam, which I thought worked with the composer's intent. So this time I sang yadam. And once again, this composer repeated more of the final fifth. And at this point, I was just angry and frustrated, no idea what to do. So I just sang. I sang everything unartistic and loud in the whole phrase. And she said, the composer finally said, "Great, that was the fifth." So these imprecise words, in this, whether more meant tuning or more meant dynamics, more could even in some cases mean a vowel or a particular consonant needs to be brought out. In time, you can find what the conductor means by these imprecise terms. And when you do, write it down. That's one of the keys in this. Sometimes the conductor will ignore something entirely. You may hear it as being wrong. It's possible that the conductor will hope to solve it through the gesture. You can give your conductor the benefit of the doubt. Trust them. It might be that it's an artistic thing that they actually like, even though it's not right in the score. Are you going to slow down here, conductor person? It's like, well, I've been slowing down here, so yes, watch. You can save some time and just write down in your score, Rit or slow, or the conductor likes to slow here, whether the composer wants to or not, whatever. And it's that conductor's artistic sensibility to it. The next one I want to bring up here is a sensitive topic. I'm aware of that, and that is the use of gender-based terms when identifying groups, especially. I'm a tenor. I have very often heard men and tenors. Very often tenors and basses are referred to as men, and sopranos and altos are often referred to as women. We know very well that there's a lot of crossover in that Venn diagram, and that this type of categorization completely ignores sensibility of transgender and intersex individuals and many others. So we as singers, because this is a sensitive topic to the individual, I hesitate to say give specific feedback, but I can say that no insult is being meant. This is a situation where the conductor is looking at perhaps 20 or 60 or 100 people, and they might forget one individual, and that's not right, but it does happen, and it's certainly not meant as a slight at all. If you are troubled by that, I would encourage you to say so to your conductor, but privately. That's absolutely appropriate, especially nowadays. This is something that conductors are taught and to be aware of. Similar term might be ladies and gentlemen. or sometimes you hear ladies and men. And there are people who will get frustrated about either side of that. You can talk to the conductor about that if so inclined. I have a similar answer to when a conductor might give one singer in the ensemble individual attention, as if to say, I'm going to use Scott's name because he's here and he knows I know he won't be offended by it. He says, Scott, watch your tuning there. Scott, your vowels are off. Scott, watch me better. Again, chances are the conductor does not mean an insult to that individual and is not trying actively to call them out. Or to make them feel worse about themselves as an artist. I've been identified individually many times, knowing that it just means, okay, I'll work on this. Great. The end. It doesn't mean I'm a bad singer or anything like that. If you're troubled by it, again, you can say so privately. This day and age, very few conductors are actually jerks. That started going out of vogue around the 80s. And so chances are, again, they're not intending anything. And finally, as a lighthearted end to verbal communication, occasionally we Americans do have to deal with British conductors, marvelous as they are. And so it's important to know that they may instinctively refer to rhythmic values in the traditional English manner rather than the manner we're more used to of half, quarter, eighth, 16th, 32nd. And so if they say semibreve, that's a whole note. If they say minim, that's half. A crotchet is a quarter. Ooh, look at that typo. And a quaver is an eighth note. And I've tried to figure out ways to put that in a mnemonic or something. So I just came up with some monsters crochet quilts. Semibreve, minim, crotchet, quaver. Yes, quilts do not tend to be crocheted, and that's why the person doing it is clearly a monster. Some monsters crochet. Well, that's a terrible idea. So that's, I think, what I have to say for verbal. We'll take communications on verbal or questions on verbal communication also at the end. It's so individual. Everybody talks differently. I didn't talk, for example, about conductors who talk fast like I do, and that it's okay to say, can you talk slower, especially if you're in a new room or an unfamiliar situation. Or about conductors who will use foreign terms you may not be familiar with. Or that may be in the score, susurrando, and you have no idea what that means, but your conductor is doing something and you don't understand what they're doing. Well, you might be able to ask them, what does susurrando meaning? And they'll say, whispering, don't you know you're Italian? No, they won't do that because few conductors are jerks these days. Environmental considerations tend to be, by this I mean things that might be out of the control of the conductor even. Or something there that, we'll get to that. One is the height of the conductor. The conductor, again, has very little control over that. If you cannot see the conductor and you think it's because of the conductor's height, it is okay to suggest that the conductor stand on a box or something. One choir I direct, actually, one of the singers constructed a very large box for me to stand on. It was great. Other ways, though, to deal with that are to space out the singers better. That depends on the acoustic. I repeat what I said earlier, though. I don't recommend that you suggest that the conductor conduct larger or higher because of their own height. That will give you different information. For example, if the conductor, again, I'm a former singer conductor, I conduct lower in my body, typically around my stomach level is my ictus plane. And you tell me to do higher, that will have an effect on how you breathe. And because you're not used to that, it might be a subconscious effect that will actively thwart what everybody's trying to go for. One topic that I like to talk about in terms of conducting, though I've never heard anyone else do so, is the clothing, the type of clothing that a conductor wears in rehearsal or concert. I prefer to conduct in long sleeves and in solids. I think it makes things easier to see and less confusing. If you're wearing a striped shirt, for example, then the singer will get a lot of information. So if your conductor wears short sleeves, be aware that there are many joints involved in conducting. The shoulder has its part, the elbow has its part, the wrist has its, and then if you have a stick or fingers, that's all involved too. If your conductor is wearing short sleeves, beware of their elbow and wrist. You might get extraneous information from them that they don't intend. Watch the hand, watch the fingertips generally. Again, making this our responsibility as singers to be able to understand what the conductor is giving us. Sometimes you'll find swoopy sleeves that may hang down. Suit coats sometimes do that. Again, watch the hands. So that make your focus be there. Similarly, the color of clothing can be an interesting challenge to the singer if it's the same as the background. I've worked with one conductor who liked to wear white shirts or light colored shirts. Great, that's their prerogative. And one day in rehearsal, I found it very difficult to follow them. And I finally realized it's because the background was a light or kind of tan colored wood in this church. So once I acknowledged that, focused on the face and the hands consciously, it was much better. Fortunately, in darker backgrounds, having darker clothing tends not to be as much of an issue. Even for those of darker skin tone, it's much easier to be seen in that category. So that's probably not going to be a particular variable. Lighting is a big issue, environmental. Sometimes the conductor is standing in a spot that's dark, especially if you're performing or rehearsing in a church. And there may be nothing you can do about that. There are no more lights in that room. There is no place where the conductor can move and still be seen, even sometimes. The only key that I have to recommend there is to watch more often. You might have to look up twice every bar. Make sure you're extra prepared with it so that you can have that ability. Sometimes, especially in concert lighting, the angle may come from behind, the angle of the lights may come from behind the conductor, blinding the singers so the goal being that the audience can see the singers, of course. You may have to angle your head in a different way, like off to the side. I have found that useful. It doesn't work in every lighting. Wear a hat to block it. I don't know, maybe not that. You can also, though, trust that your conductor is there and still keep glimpsing up as much as you can. Instead of looking up once per bar, you may just barely glimpse up more often. Depends on the angle, it's hard to say. Experiment with the manner in which you watch to find what works well. Usually also, if the light is bright in that manner, you can say something and it's remediable, usually. Unlike sometimes if the conductor's in the dark. Okay, we are well past the intended time. So before questions, I'll just conclude. Your conductor is there to help you. You are on the same team. They want you to be singing at your very best. So therefore, partly it can be our responsibility as singers sometimes to help that to work, to see what it is they're conveying, sometimes subconsciously. To that end, again, be attentive, be extra prepared if you're struggling with conductor. Mark your scores, count, breathe, watch, trust the conductor, trust the people you're singing with, and use them to help as well. Listen well. I guess that's what I'll close on. Questions, though. We have at least one good one, you said.
We have many great questions at this
point.
Boy. The first one, Stephanie, I'm going to save your first question for last. Communicating musicality with facial expressions. Maybe talk a little bit about that. Your eyebrows are very mobile.
One of the first things that a conducting teacher told me when I was an undergraduate is that my then very dark beard hid expression, and therefore I had to emote more with my face. And this is fascinating because others have told me I have one of the more emotive conducting faces they've ever worked with. Is the question being able to read the facial cues or...
Well, no, it specifically says communicating musicality by facial expressions.
Musicality.
Talk a bit about that, yeah.
There are so many potential examples. For example, I'll try to think of myself as well as a couple of others. coming to mind. For me, delicacy is a raising of eyebrows and a lowering of jaw. Sometimes if there's a vigorous something, I'll tend to lower the eyebrows, maybe even lower the head. I also didn't talk about body angle and how to twist. In some cases, you'll be able to see it more readily than others. For those conductors who you feel have less expressive faces, they're probably being expressive in subtle ways. I remember one in particular I thought of who he could just do this. He could barely raise the eyebrows, and it conveyed something musical to me, but I had to be extra attentive to it and extra watching for it. And this is another case where once you see it and figure out what it is, then you can write it in the score. Yeah, that's my short answer.
Now this one's I think it goes to culture within ensembles. Is there a reason why a singer can't ask for explanations or clarifications?
Yeah, that is very much, different choirs work differently. And part of it has to do with the preference of the conductor. There are many conductors, and I'm sometimes in this category too, there are many conductors who have so much to do that they like to have their own flow. For example, you might finish a run through of a piece, and immediately the conductor has 6 different things they want to convey. And if a question comes, they'll forget 4 of them. That's one of my difficulties. I sometimes say, hold on to the question, we'll get there. Yeah. It might have to do as a time-saving mechanism too. People tend to ask questions in a longer span than is needed. I've had questions in choir go a full minute. When all it took is, do you want crescendo? So they might be hoping to, the conductor may be hoping just to be able to save the time and answer the question outside. There are, I guess those are the 2 big things that come to mind at least. Be aware again that the conductor does though want to make things better. So if you have a question for them and it's not appropriate in your choir to ask publicly, then go ahead and ask privately. Again, few conductors these days are jerks. That's going to be, I should quote myself on Facebook for that or something.
We'll add it to the list of Gary Cannon quotations for reference later. Kathleen also made a very good point. Sometimes when the conductor's ictus is very, very low, the music stand will obscure the gesture. That's another sort of environmental issue. The music stand has to be where the conductor's gesture can actually be seen. Yeah, the gesture has to be where it can be seen. Yeah,
there are some fascinating environmental controls in that. One is, of course, you can request that the conductor be raised. One other important consideration I'm keenly aware of right now is eyesight. Since I've only started wearing glasses about 2 years ago, and then COVID happened, so I'm only still getting used to conducting in glasses. And I find that sometimes I have to raise the music stand higher in rehearsal just to see it clearly. Then I can lower it back and adjust. So there may be things outside of control, or with any luck, the conductor will adjust accordingly.
Yeah, glasses just for conducting, and glasses for reading, and glasses for computering, and glasses for all the other things.
Yeah, I actually have specific conducting glasses that, you can share this with the conductors too, where the ophthalmologist gave me the whole test of better or worse kind of thing. When I was looking at a piece of paper on a countertop. So I have distance view on the top and this far, however far that may be, on the bottom. They're useless for reading close at all, but they're perfect for what I need for conducting.
With the few minutes we have left, there's one more question that I think is worth exploring. I'd like to know what annoys or frustrates conductors about the responses they get from ensembles while they are conducting. What frustrates or annoys conductors about the responses they get from choirs while they are conducting?
That is so personalized to the conductor.
Oh, it's probably, yeah.
But if you're but I mean, so I can speak, okay, for myself, I will say things like groaning of disapproval when a piece is announced, we're now going to sing the Brahms. Or we cut off after a run through that was not great. And the groan of disapproval, of self-disapproval usually, of, oh, that was just awful kind of thing. It's like, yeah, okay, we have rehearsal. We know, that's okay. So I guess it's those, perhaps some of us self-deprecating, some of us judgmental to the music itself or to the choir. Those are big ones for me. What a noise, or this is related to a question that was asked earlier about asking questions during rehearsal. If you find you're the only one asking questions in rehearsal, then don't ask any more that day. Maybe a way to think about it is when you ask a question in rehearsal, wait for someone else to ask one before you ask another. And so that way we just make sure that the conductor doesn't become frustrated by you personally when you may be asking very good questions. I mean, wow, again, so many ways that a person can be irritated. How do I announce them all? Wow, that question is difficult and that irritates me.
Yeah. Steve reminded us that crosstalk or chatter between numbers is frustrating for all.
Yeah.
Steve, yes, it is.
Yeah, talking is a good one. I would say though that many conductors, myself included, acknowledge that when singers talk to each other, there can be useful information being transferred. It's not always a waste of time or something. And so the key then is to talk really quietly, whisper, unvoiced, if possible.
I had a conductor that always crossed his arms and stared at whatever the conversation was and said, "Is it important enough to share with the rest of the ensemble? Because you're sharing it right now." And that would be the one of the jerk conductors.
Yeah. This is why we have kept our comments anonymous.
Yeah.
Except for the greats like Furtwängler. Oh, I was going to mention Reiner, who conducted like this with the stick, and the way he cued people was, you just had to watch. There's no answer. Anyway.
Well, Gary, I don't have any more questions, I believe, and so I think we could probably wrap it up. Does that seem fair?
Very good.
All right. I am just thanking you so much, Gary, for yet another incredibly informative presentation. It's always a pleasure when we get to pick your brain a little bit and share it with the community at large. We want to thank all of our participants this morning for your questions and your contributions. And I would like to share with you that the next offering of the Emerald Choral Academy will take place on Saturday, May 21st, when Emerald Choral Academy faculty member and very familiar performer to the Pacific Northwest, Ryan Beatty, almost Dr. Ryan Beatty, I believe, will be offering Vocal Anatomy 104, The Pharynx. Ryan returns after his acclaimed presentation on the larynx last semester, and he's just taking us one notch anatomically higher. We at the Emerald Ensemble are grateful for the enthusiasm of you, our audiences and supporters. As the Emerald Choral Academy continues, you can help to support these efforts by donating at emeraldensemble.org. Those links are in the chat. You can also let us know of any topics that you would like to see discussed in the future, which we actually really need to hear more from you about, as we have kind of hit just about the whole list that Gary and I had laid out at the beginning of the Emerald Choral Academy. So please do send us those suggestions for topics you'd like to see covered.
Otherwise, I'll just give lectures about William Walton.
Yeah, well, we're Ralph Vaughan Williams, though, right? I mean,
we'll get to that.
But we'll get to that. In the meantime, I'm Scott Kovacs, Executive Director of the Emerald Ensemble. On behalf of Gary and all of the Emerald Ensemble board and performing artists, I wish you good physical, mental, and musical health. Thank you. And I think we're done.
Hooray!